Just short of 2 years after King Charles I raised his banner at Nottingham in the summer of 1642, his cause was dealt a potentially mortal sucker punch due to the Scottish Covenanter intervention and the subsequent disaster at Marston Moor. Thousands of badly needed royalist soldiers lay dead, and the entirety of northern England was now under parliamentary control. However, although it seemed like everything was tipping in the Roundheads' favour, Parliament did have its problems. However many short-term triumphs they enjoyed, it was clear that temporary local fighters and militiamen could never achieve a truly permanent victory against the king. Welcome to our 4th video on the English Civil War, Parliament's establishment of the new model army, and its first proper test against Charles's final dice throw at Naseby in 1645. It really used to be hard to stake your claim to lands in the British Isles, but if you want to do it now and reap some rewards for it, it's easy. Just use our sponsor, Established Titles. They sell small plots of land in Scotland, which are sought after because of a historic Scottish custom where landowners are referred to as lairds, or lords and ladies in English. But to protect these lands, a tree is planted with every order, preserving picturesque woodland and biodiversity. And Established Titles supports charities like One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future. You'll get at least 1 square foot of land in Scotland with a unique plot number and a certificate to prove it. This allows you to officially get Lord or Lady on your credit cards, plane tickets, and more. You can also get maps to show your new estate, including the immensely detailed hand-drawn 1611 map by John Speed, held by the National Library of Scotland. It makes a great last-minute gift, and they even have couple packs that come with adjoining plots of land. The first 200 plots bought via our link will all be put together within a few minutes of each other next to the Kings and Generals plot, so act fast to join our little union of forest territories. Check out their early Black Friday sale for discounts. Plus, if you use our code KINGS, you'll get an extra 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/kings to get yourself a title or give it as a gift and help support the channel. As Rupert's Marston Moor campaign was starting up in northern England, manoeuvres of equal consequence were taking place in the south. When we last caught up with Charles, he was escaping from Oxford to Worcester, being pursued by the parliamentarian armies of William Waller and the Earl of Essex. In a move which has since been regarded as a strategic blunder, Parliament's Committee of Both Kingdoms ordered the Thames armies to split up. Essex marched off to relieve the royalist siege of Lyme, while Waller's cavalry-heavy force continued to pursue the king with diminished strength. Unfortunately for the latter, Charles used the opportunity to go on the offensive again, luring Waller into a trap and defeating him at Cropready Bridge on June 29th. Even worse than this were events taking place in the far southwest. After parting from Waller, Essex relieved Lyme and then even briefly managed to lift the long-running siege of Plymouth. In the process, however, Essex's reckless western march into a firmly royalist Cornwall left his forces trapped between Charles's reinforced army and the sea. Isolated from help, Essex himself had to flee in a small fishing boat, and despite the fact his cavalry managed to escape, 6,000 footmen were forced to surrender at Lostwithiel. Alarmed at the sudden reversals of fortune so close to London, Parliament ordered Waller and the Eastern Association Army under Manchester to reinforce the west. When the king subsequently attempted to raise a parliamentarian siege on Basing House in late October, he was blocked and forced to fight the Second Battle of Newbury against an army twice the size of his own. Against all odds, and despite the near capture of the king, Charles's army managed to retreat unimpeded, partially because of Manchester's reluctance to press the attack. The king's final campaigns of the year were similarly successful. Manchester once again failed to decisively attack the Royalists on November 9th at Speenhamland, and a week later was unable to stop Charles relieving Banbury. On the 23rd, relative optimism pervaded the king's camp as the soldiers went into winter quarters. Parliament's failure to successfully end the war in late 1644 prompted recriminations and blame among the increasingly factionalized set of MPs during the winter of 44–45. More consequentially, it led radicals such as Oliver Cromwell and William Waller to begin speaking in favour of establishing a completely different style of military, It would be, as Trevor Royal put it, a professional and disciplined regular force, well paid and well equipped, under the control of an independent commander-in-chief. In short, it would be a permanent army staffed by dedicated experts, detached from the politicking of Parliament, whose sole aim was to gain victory over the king. After weeks of inquiry and debate, this new model army finally came to be on January 11, 1645, when the Commons passed the new model ordinance and began mustering 12 regiments of 1,200 footmen each, 10 regiments of cavalry, each numbering 600 troopers, and 1 regiment of 1,000 dragoons. 10 days later, supreme command of the new model army was granted to Sir Thomas Fairfax, due to a combination of extensive military experience and because although he was unquestionably loyal to the parliamentarian cause, he was not a member of Parliament. Henceforth, members of Parliament were largely barred from holding commands, ending the military careers of the Earls of Manchester and Essex. Though the embryonic new model army would become immensely formidable in the course of months and years, it needed time to fill its ranks and become an effective fighting force. This necessity determined a measured parliamentary offensive strategy in the early months of 1645, and also made the continued cooperation of Leven's Scots very valuable. However, the Covenanters were becoming wary of providing too much assistance to their English allies. This was partly because the Scots feared radicals such as Cromwell would renege on the Solemn League, and partly because in Charles's northern kingdom, royalist allies were causing utter chaos. Back in September 1643, the warring factions in Ireland signed a peace which freed up English royalist soldiers to be sent over to assist the king. The agreement also allowed the Irish Confederates, whose alliances were constantly shifting, to renew their war against the Presbyterian Scots and parliamentarians. Therefore, at the end of June 1644, 2,000 Irish mercenaries, raised up by the royalist Earl of Antrim, sailed to Ashnamercan in Scotland under Alistair MacColla. Upon landing, MacColla immediately began rallying Highland chiefs who were bitterly hostile to the Covenanter Campbell clan, such as leaders of the Macphersons and Macdonalds, to war. Meanwhile, in Oxford, James Graham, otherwise known as the Marquis of Montrose, had defected from the Covenanters before the Civil War began. With the threat of his countrymen's pro-parliamentarian intervention at the forefront, Charles appointed Montrose his Lord Lieutenant in Scotland and sent him north with only 2 loyal companions. When Montrose arrived, he joined with MacColla at Blair Athol, and the two immediately made common cause. This was convenient for both men, because, as Stuart Reid points out, Montrose was in need of an army, and MacColla was just as desperately in need of an employer. This ragtag army of unlikely Celtic allies and even unlikelier royalists moved south to Perth. Outside of the city, on the plains of Tippermore, Montrose and MacColla defeated a Covenanter army about the same size as their own, whose infantry was primarily made up of raw recruits. Soon they learned that a large Covenanter force was assembling at Stirling. Seeking to get clear of it and to raise local allies, Montrose marched north and bypassed Dundee on the way to Aberdeen, where another enemy army awaited him. Despite facing an army that outnumbered his own, and which had taken a strong position, Montrose and his Irish colleague smashed the Covenanter loyalists again, inflicting 520 casualties and suffering only minimal losses of their own. Due to the death of his favourite drummer boy, who was shot in cold blood during pre-battle negotiations, Montrose let his troops viciously sack Aberdeen for 4 days on September 13, 1644. This event, fueled by generations-long blood feuds and sectarian hatred, would become known as Black Friday. In October 1644, Montrose campaigned throughout Aberdeenshire against his Covenanter rival, the Earl of Argyll, meeting his numerically superior forces in battle at Phoebe, where neither side was able to gain an advantage. When winter drew in, Argyll went back to Strathbogie and Montrose marched back over the hills to Blair Athol. Far more consequential than simply beating a few small Scottish armies, Montrose's actions were beginning to affect the war's greater strategic situation. The Covenanter government, growing concerned with royalist success in their backyard, ordered Leven to detach 9 regiments of his own army, led by Marston Moor veteran William Bailey, to stop Montrose. Argyll and Bailey managed to unite their forces, but constant disagreement led to the two men parting company soon after. Montrose, unwilling to give his rivals a moment to relax, undertook a perilous march and descended on Argyll's 3,000-strong army with 1,500 of his own at Inverlochy on February 2nd. Again, the Marquis won a complete victory against a vastly superior force. These events ensured that Covenanter priorities would be directed away from winning the war in England, and diverted the attention of Leven's army away from the brewing campaign of 1645. Instead, they remained in the Scottish marches to prevent Montrose from receiving reinforcements from Charles. The parliamentarians were on their own. With the Royalists lacking any real strategic direction, and Parliament waiting for its new army to sharpen its claws, campaigning in the south began in a disjointed manner. In the west, an array of the King's commanders attempted to secure the Welsh marches and take pressure off Chester. In the far south, Lord Goring ravaged Hampshire before retreating to Salisbury at the end of January. Hundreds of miles north, Marmaduke Langdale's Northern Horse managed to relieve Pontefract in early March, and was back in the Royalist stronghold of Newark by March 4th. The Committee of both Kingdoms fired the opening shot in Parliament's 1645 campaign by ordering Cromwell, who had returned from sparring with Goring's forces in the West Country, to move just east of Oxford on April 21st. Meanwhile, Fairfax led the bulk of the new model army from Windsor to Reading, where he and his 10,000 were resupplied. While the now fully supplied Fairfax set about marching west to save Taunton from siege, Cromwell repeatedly harassed Charles's forces near their capital, brazenly seizing all the cart horses which would be needed to transport artillery, and preventing the royal army from leaving. However, when Goring and his 4,000 returning cavalry encountered Cromwell at Radcott Bridge on May 3rd, the parliamentarian horse retreated south into friendly territory. With the troublesome parliamentary cavalry commander out of the way, Charles marched from Oxford to Stow-on-the-Wold with his troops, where he conferred with prominent royalist leaders, including Goring, Rupert and others. Once again, the Council of War argued about the correct course to take, eventually concluding that Goring and 3,000 horse would split off west and bring Taunton into royalist hands, while the main royalist army would go north. Reacting to the enemy's movement, the committee changed its mind about the new model army's goals and sent its leader new orders. Reluctantly obeying, Fairfax sent 4 regiments to Taunton and turned most of his soldiers back, with the aim of an eventual rendezvous with Cromwell. The latter shadowed Charles's army from afar as it marched towards Chester, but was unable to prevent the Royalists from lifting the siege there. Parliament sent messages asking Leven for aid, but Montrose's continuing success in Scotland left the Covenanters unable and unwilling to divert resources south. Partially because the committee believed that Oxford would surrender without a fight due to bad information, Fairfax was ordered to besiege the city beginning May 21st, news which reached the Royalists only a few days later. In response, Charles's field army unexpectedly pivoted and began marching southeast towards Leicester, an important parliamentary garrison, which was reached just over a week later. Aiming to distract the new model army besieging their increasingly food-deprived capital, the Royalists attacked. A savage 2-day clash over the town's defences and a veritable violent storm of cannon shot followed, after which Leicester's garrison was overwhelmed and the city stormed and looted. However, 400 Royalist troops were dead and many times more wounded, depleting the king's strength severely. Seeing the danger of continuing to fight and having gained much plunder, soldiers began to desert Charles and head home. His remaining army stayed in and around Leicester until June 4th, when it moved on to Daventry. Meanwhile, the fall of such an important Midlands garrison prompted the committee's order for Fairfax to raise the siege of Oxford and go bring Charles to battle. On June 9, 1645, 2 key decisions were made by Parliament. Firstly, Fairfax was given strategic independence from the committee. Secondly, Oliver Cromwell, Parliament's rising star, was confirmed in his assignment to the heretofore vacant position of Lieutenant General of Horse in the New Model Army. Realizing that a fight might be on the horizon, Prince Rupert ordered an increasingly lethargic Lord Goring to return from the West Country. However, Goring's response letter, which reiterated his temporary inability to return and pleaded the king not to fight until he did, was intercepted by the New Model Army. This intelligence coup had twofold consequences. It alerted Fairfax that he didn't have to worry about Goring reinforcing the king, while also depriving the king of any knowledge that he was not going to be reinforced. Now confident about their chances, Fairfax and Cromwell moved closer to the royalist position, which the efficient scouts of the New Model Army reported to be close by. The royalists attempted a retreat north to recruit more troops, but as they did, their rearguard was constantly harassed by parliamentarian cavalry attacks. It became clear near the Northamptonshire town of Naseby that a key decision had to be made. Prince Rupert uncharacteristically ordered a further withdrawal and avoidance of battle, but his advice was not heeded. The king would stand and fight. At this point, it's worth examining the armies which faced off on that historic day in summer 1645. Deprived of its northern manpower base, the royalist force deploying on Dust Hill near Naseby was far diminished from that which had done battle at Marston Moor the year before. Its core infantry brigades in the 1st and 2nd lines numbered 3,500 veteran soldiers, comprising 2,925 musketeers and 575 pikemen. In the left centre were the regiments of Sir George Lissell, and to his right were arrayed units under Henry Bard, as well as the Queen's personal lifeguard. In the right centre were regiments under the command of Sir Edward Hopton on the inside and the Duke of York on the outside. 3 further regiments of foot drew up in the 2nd line, while Prince Rupert, King Charles and a mixed reserve stayed in the rear, made up of the King's personal lifeguard horse and foot, in addition to Prince Rupert's bluecoats. Interspersed between the ranks of infantry were 3 small divisions of cavalry, 2 behind the vanguard and 1 more behind the 2nd line. On the royalist left flank were roughly 1,700 horse in 3 divisions, including Marmaduke Langdale's northern troopers. They were drawn up in the Swedish manner, with 200 musketeers lined up between each unit. Charles's other wing, anchored on a series of hedges, mirrored its counterpart in strength and was under Prince Maurice's authority. This gathering of cavalry comprised Rupert's most elite units and lifeguard divisions, revered units which had served with distinction since Edge Hill. They also had musketeers accompanying them. Overall, the royalist army at Naseby counted among their ranks about 10,000 to 10,500 soldiers, just over half of them mounted troops. After some prompting from Cromwell, the numerically superior New Model Army took up a position on the opposing Closter Hill, the red and blue uniforms of its soldiers making it stand out on the verdant landscape. Its pike and musketeer infantry in the middle probably numbered about 8,500 in 3 lines of battle. 5 regiments were in the 1st, 3 manned the 2nd, and half a regiment was in the 3rd. The foot were led on the tactical level by Philip Skippon, one of Parliament's most veteran infantry commanders, while Lord General Sir Thomas Fairfax was with his reserve, overseeing the battle from a strategic distance. On the wings, Lieutenant General of Horse Cromwell commanded 4,000 mounted troops on the right, including the now infamous Ironsides. On the other wing was Henry Ireton, Cromwell's son-in-law, who opposed Maurice with about 2,500 on the parliamentarian left. At around 9:30 in the morning on June 14th, Cromwell surveyed the situation from his elevated position on Mill Hill. He became determined to exploit a potential opportunity in a feature which anchored the western side of the parliamentarian formation, the Sulby Hedges. The Lieutenant General energetically rode away to the rear and arrived half a mile later in the presence of a dragoon contingent under Colonel John Oakey. At Cromwell's instruction, the Colonel's dragoons mounted their horses, moved out beyond the hedge line, and ascended the slope beyond. After riding west of the bushes for a short while, fully visible to the Royalist army, the dragoons approached Maurice's right side cavalry. There, they were met by volley after volley of musketry from units who had prepared in advance for their arrival, and were forced to withdraw down a small slope for cover. From their now superior position, Oki's dragoons laid down a withering fire on the royal cavalry from beyond Sulby Hedge, disordering their formation and causing significant losses. Receiving reports of a developing situation on the right wing which required attention, Prince Rupert moved out from his position behind the royalist foot to appraise the situation. Upon arriving, it was immediately clear that Maurice's horse could not withstand such harassment in their current position, and so were ordered to advance immediately. After moving out of range, the royalist cavalry took a moment to halt, reordering themselves, before launching a thunderous charge. Opposite them, Henry Ireton's horse returned the gesture, galloping down Sulby Hill and meeting their foe at its base in a fierce clash. On the inside, closer to the infantry, Vermuyden and Ireton's units were incredibly effective, routing 3 cavalry divisions opposite them and then moving to wheel on the royalist centre. This proved to be a mistake. Rupert's units on the outside decisively swept the parliamentarian horse arrayed against them off the field, and then turned to crash into the now distracted Ireton. The latter's forces completely collapsed at being hit in the rear, and were routed from the field, pursued towards the artillery train by the victorious units under Rupert. Once again, the prince had failed to press his advantage. At this point, about 11 AM, Charles's infantry vanguard began a forward march with its right side angled slightly ahead of the rest. Unfortunately for the new model army, both their muskets and heavy guns fired too high, barely inflicting any damage on the advancing veterans. Upon contact, they drove through the central first line of Roundhead Foot amidst brutal close-quarters combat, in which muskets were commonly used as clubs. All of this fighting resulted in the creation of a deep semicircular salient around the victorious infantry brigades. Despite their initial success, the King's centre hadn't yet made a decisive breakthrough, and were now attacked by the new parliamentarian reserves from the front and flanks of the Bulge. As the clash of pike and musket continued, Sir Marmaduke Langdale's northern horse on Dust Hill's eastern edge launched their own charge. Cromwell's own first rank of cavalry mirrored their movements and prepared for the engagement. The stalwart parliamentary horse almost immediately slowed the progress of Langdale's attack, but nevertheless the royalists fought doggedly, gradually pushing Cromwell's first line back through the rough, narrow terrain made up of rabbit warrens and small hills. However, the northern cavalry was incredibly fatigued at this point, exhausted by the heavy fighting against the Ironsides. Although the king sent his reserve lifeguard into the fray, they stood no chance of resisting when Cromwell called forward his second line, and were routed to the rear, where they sheltered near Rupert's unengaged Bluecoat regiment. Having trounced the royalists standing in his way, Oliver Cromwell commanded an immediate halt of all his troops on the right wing, displaying phenomenal authority by maintaining order and discipline where lesser leaders would have faltered. The Lieutenant General took a few minutes to put his troopers back into a proper formation, during which he was joined by Fairfax and the remnant of Ireton's horse, before embarking on a final cavalry charge into the left flank of Charles's now struggling infantry. Pinned as they were from the front and sides, the struggling royalist foot stood no chance of withstanding Cromwell's attack. As the king's army began to disintegrate, Fairfax, who was now up front, noticed that Prince Rupert's bluecoats were still unbroken and refused to flee. The new model army's commander led his personal guard around the bluecoats' rear, while another parliamentarian foot regiment attacked it in the front. Rupert's guard did not retreat and died to a man. In the middle of the slaughter, it is reported that one of the parliamentarian soldiers managed to seize the bluecoats' regimental colours and boasted about doing so. When he was reprimanded for doing so by an officer, Fairfax personally intervened, saying, "I have honour enough, let him take that to himself." Naseby finally shattered the royalist war machine. At the cost of only a few hundred casualties, Fairfax's new model army had killed around 1,000 royalist soldiers, injured many more, and captured about 5,000 infantry, most of whom were Charles's battle-hardened corps of veterans. Rather than pursuing his shattered enemy any further, Fairfax immediately set about recovering Leicester, which was taken by June 18th. Although Charles's allies would continue to resist for almost a year, the Battle of Naseby essentially ended the First Civil War. However, dissent among the triumphant and the presence of royalist allies would ensure that the British Isles would not know harmony for a long time to come. Thanks again to our sponsor, Established Titles. Buy a small plot of land in Scotland and become a lady or a lord, or give this title as an amazing and easy gift. In return, Established Titles plants a tree to protect the pristine forests of our planet. Take advantage of their early Black Friday sale and use our discount code KINGS at establishedtitles.com/kings to get a further 10% off. We'll have more on this conflict coming up, so make sure to subscribe and press the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps us immensely. Our videos would be impossible to produce without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links down in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.